everybody. Welcome to the Hallmarkies podcast. And we have another author with us today. We love talking with authors, and we have Gabrielle Meyer here. And thank you so much for coming on the podcast.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah. So you have a new book, In This Moment, and we're going to talk more about that. I just finished reading it last night and I really enjoyed it. But let's get to know you first. And we like to do when we have anybody on, we always like to figure out, how did you get to this point where you're writing these books? How did you get started writing? What was your inspiration?
Sure. Well, as you said, my name is Gabrielle Meyer. I live in central Minnesota on the Mississippi River, and we have a lot of really cool history in this area. I actually grew up in a historic estate. My dad was a caretaker, so we grew up above the carriage house, kind of like Sabrina.
Yeah.
So it was a really cool childhood, and that was where my love of history really came from. I remember asking my mom tons of questions about the people who had lived there, and make believing all of these things. My sister and I used to run around the yard all the time and dress up, and my older brothers were extremely embarrassed because we were embarrassing them in front of their friends. So anyway, that was kind of where my love of history came from. I went on to work for a local county historical society, and then I worked for the Minnesota Historical Society for 10 years. And that's what I studied in college as well. And then I'd always, I think the love of history came first, but then, I found the love of reading. The only thing that I ever actually failed in school was spelling in fourth grade. And so I remember all of my teachers all along said, you need to read, and that'll help with your spelling. And so that was where my love of reading came from. So combining the two, I was like 10 years old, I think, when I was like, you know what, this is what I want to do. I want to write stories for other people to read. It just kind of never went away.
Did you have favorite books
growing up?
Yeah.
Well, yes, I loved the Babysitter Club series. I remember the moment my librarian showed that to me. And then in Christian fiction, I fell in love with the Love Comes Softly series. That was my first introduction to historical fiction and Christian fiction. And then my very favorite of all time growing up was the Maud Hart Loveless series, Betsy Tacy. And I don't know if you're familiar with that one. It's not quite as well known, but kind of it has a flavor of like Little House on the Prairie. It follows the same family, and it's the author, it was really her family story, but it's turn of the century in Mankato, Minnesota. And so not prairie by any means, but yeah. So those were my
What's
favorites.
It called again?
It's the Betsy Tacy series. And it follows Maud Hart Loveless is the author, and it starts at her 5th birthday, and it follows her through her marriage, actually around World War I. So
I haven't heard of that.
Yeah.
Yeah,
it's a great
cool.
series.
So how did you get your first book published? I always figured that must be the hardest one to kind of get all the connections and all that stuff.
Yeah, it was definitely a process. So I had when I first read Love Comes Softly years ago, I remember turning it around and seeing the Bethany House logo on it. And Bethany House is really one of the pioneers in Christian fiction. And I saw that they're in St. Paul, Minnesota. And because I live in Minnesota, that just clicked. It was like, oh, I could actually write for them someday. Not quite as easy as you would think, right? Start writing for them. So I wrote for years and years. And then finally, when I decided to get serious about it, it was around 2012. And I wrote several books for them to consider through the years. And they kept saying, we love your writing. You just need a book that stands out. You need something that is completely different than anybody else, because it's really hard to break into the market. So as I was trying to find that idea, my agent had some great opportunities pop up for me. So I started writing for Barber first. Barber was my very first publication. In 2015, I had a novella release with them. And so that was after 3 years of writing. And
how did you get an agent?
So actually the very first book that I wrote, I went to a conference, the ACFW conference, and met with several different editors while I was there, and they all liked the idea of my story. And so because I had interest first from editors, it was a little bit easier to get interest from an agent. It was actually a friend of mine who read one of my manuscripts, and she said, I will send this on to my agent and recommend you to her. So it still was a process. It still took like 9 months after that before she actually read the manuscript. So that was my first agent. Then she retired from agenting, and then I stayed with the same agency, but have a different agent now.
Mm.
Her name is Wendy Lawton. Yeah, love her.
That's
So
really cool.
yeah. So,
And so,
every single author that you meet has a little bit different story as to how they get published. And
mhm. Ho, ho, ho. We'd like to take a second and thank our sponsor for this episode of the podcast. It's the Hallmarkies Patreon.
Do you love Hallmarkies podcast, especially at Christmas?
Do you enjoy the holiday previews, recaps, interviews, and bonus episodes?
If the answer is yes, please consider supporting the Hallmarkies Patreon. We need your help to do what we do both during the Christmas season and all year round.
But not only do you help a podcast led by strong, independent women by becoming a Patreon, you get to become a part of the Hallmarkies family.
Starting at only $2 a month as a patron, you will have access to our Facebook Patreon group where we talk about the movies, shows, and more all year.
We also have many monthly patron watch-alongs with guests like Lacey Chabert, Natalie Hall, Paul Campbell, Mary Lou Henner, and more, giving their behind-the-scenes details of their films.
As a patron, you also have the chance to provide input into the podcast and even join us at different tiers.
So this Christmas season, spread some cheer to the Hallmarkies Patreon and become a member today. You won't regret it.
Go to patreon.com/hallmarkies to learn more.
That's patreon.com/Hallmarkies. That's always fascinating to me, how you're able to get your foot in the door.
yeah.
Yeah.
Well, my best advice would be to anybody who might be listening and curious to attend writers' conferences, because that's where you are going to meet agents and editors one-on-one who are there to listen. They're there to find, more talent. And then you're also meeting other writers too. So you're building your network, your friendships, and all of that comes together in lots of different ways that you can ever imagine.
Yeah. So would you consider yourself a pantser or a plotter?
I am a super plotter. Oh my gosh. Yeah, I've had lots of good spirited debates with people about this. And it's everybody's personal preference. There's no right or wrong way, but I look at it like a trip. So if I'm going to go on this great trip and I'm going to spend a lot of money, and I know that there's a lot of things there that I want to see, I'm going to make sure that I have an agenda. I maybe not. We'll talk to my family. I actually do have this every single day. I know what we're going to do. I know where we're going to stay. I know how we're going to get around, because when I get there, I don't want to worry about any of that. I want to make sure I've done all of my pre-planning so that when I'm there, I can enjoy it. That's how I look at writing a book. I need to know where I'm taking the reader, because I never want the reader to ever feel like, oh my gosh, this thing is going off the rails. Where are we going with this? And so then before I write it, I have it all plotted out. I know scene by scene what's going to happen, so that I can just kind of enjoy developing then the characters and the story as I go along. So plotter all the way.
Yeah. Nice. Yeah. So you have these timeless books. How did you get the idea for doing this series, and how did that all come about?
Sure. I wish there was a great answer to that. It just kind of fell in my head one day, actually. I was thinking about time travel books in general, and just the kind of basic idea that somebody is in their normal life, excuse me, and they accidentally fall through a portal of time, and then they land somewhere that's completely foreign to them, and then they try to get back to their normal time. So as I was thinking about that, I thought, what if somebody was born like that? What if they had these 2 or 3 equally compelling lives that they're completely invested in, and at a certain point they have to decide which one to keep and which one to forfeit? And so I was actually standing in my mom's driveway thinking about that one day, and instantly the first book came to mind, the first book in the series, When the Day Comes. And very quickly after that, as I plotted it, I figured out book 2 and book 3. And it's kind of been a wild ride since then.
Wow.
I've really enjoyed writing these stories.
Yeah. Were you always interested in like romantic fiction? Was that always uh something that you were drawn to?
Yes, for sure. I love historical romance. It's my favorite genre of all of them. And so
Mm-hmm.
I
Yeah.
do write contemporary for Love Inspired. I write contemporary romance. Um, and I also write cozy mysteries, which are contemporary but have some historical elements to them.
Mm-hmm.
But even if you read the other books that I write, I have a lot of historical references, and
Mm-hmm.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it must be interesting to do all the research that you have to do for.
Yes. Yeah. I think that's one of the more daunting things for authors who maybe want to write historical, but the research kind of, maybe actually know a few authors who
Mm-hmm.
have said that to me. I would love to write historical. Part of it's because I went to school for public history, and I worked at a historical society for a long time. I've got a lot of study tools that I use when I'm doing research, and I guess the thing that I always have to tell myself is I will never know everything. You can't possibly. But even, in our world today, I don't know everything there is to know about what's going on
That's
everywhere,
true.
right? So I just try to find my characters and what my characters are going to know. And so then once I
Mhm.
feel like I've got a good grasp of their understanding of what's going on around them, then I can dive into the story.
Is it hard writing the dialogue especially for a book in a different time, like getting the back and forth, kind of making it sound natural?
Yeah, that's one of the things that I don't know if I struggle with as much as I put a lot of time and effort into it, because I don't want to bog down a story with too much of it, because we are modern readers, and old English is not going to flow well in our minds as we're reading. So I try to find a couple of key phrases that they might use um, in that time period. And I do that through a few different ways. I read journals and letters. Letters are a big one for me. And
Mm.
then also other books, that are research books from that time period, trying to figure out, how did they say yes? How did they say no? And not worrying too much about um, being completely accurate, but as accurate as possible.
So you have a new book in this moment. Why don't you tell us a little bit about it?
Sure. So in this moment is book 2 in the Timeless series, and it is about Maggie. Maggie is the daughter of the heroine from book 1. And Maggie has inherited her mother's time crossing gift, as well as her father's time crossing gift. And I don't like to give away too much in case the listener hasn't listened to book 1 or read book 1 yet. But if you pick up book 2 before book 1, you're going to get some of those spoilers right away at the beginning. But Maggie lives in 3 time periods. She lives in 1861, 1941, and 2001. And when she goes to sleep in each one, she wakes up in the next. So she goes to sleep in 1861, she wakes up in 1941, she goes to sleep in 1941, she wakes up in 2001, and then she goes back to 1861 again. And each time she's gone, no time passes. So she's living these 3 simultaneous lives. To her, 3 days have passed. To everybody else who lives in her world, only 1 day has passed. And on her 21st birthday, she has to choose which of those lives to keep and which one to forfeit. And so it's not an easy decision for her. She loves all 3 equally, and has very different lives in each of them, but she is a healer in all 3 of them. In 2001, she is a 4th-year medical student. In 1941, she is a Navy nurse, and then 1861, she wants to be a nurse, but she is the official hostess for her father, who is a senator. So, and of
Yeah.
course, there's a gentleman in each timeline that attracts
Yes.
her attention.
Yeah. So what made you decide on these dates, 1861, 1941, 2001?
So when I was younger, and learning about the American Civil War and World War II, I was always fascinated with the idea that they had similar ending years. So, 1861 to 1865 was the Civil War. 1941 to 1945 was World War II. That just always kind of, I'm not a numbers person by any means, but that always just kind of seemed interesting to me. Then I remember on September 11th, 2001, the day that the Twin Towers fell, I remember specifically thinking, it's 2001. Are we starting another war in a year that ends with a one? And so when I had the idea for this book, I instantly knew those were the three that I would choose, kind of for that reason, but also each path she is in Washington, D.C. at some point. So you get to see contrasts in the same city in different eras, which I find really fascinating. She goes into the White House in each path, and I did it intentionally. I had an early reviewer say, what are the odds that this person would be able to go into the White House in all three of her lives? But I'm like, it's fiction. But part of that was because
Time travel.
time travel, suspend belief. But part of that was I wanted to show the difference in the White House and the security and the different presidencies and stuff like that. And then because we were starting wars in each of those paths, just showing the differences and the similarities and how those wars started. And those are major turning points in American history for everybody who lived during them. So,
yeah. Well, what I think makes it work so well is that so you have the rule that she can't knowingly change history. So if she knowingly changes history, then that era goes away.
Yep.
And I thought that was very smart.
Thanks. Yeah. So that's another thing about time travel books that always get me a little worked up is that sometimes all of a sudden they're changing history and then there's all these holes in the plot and you're like, wait, but if that happened, then this happened. So early on, I decided that would be one of the time crossing rules, is that if you knowingly change history in one of those times, for whatever reason it is, that you forfeit that timeline. And that comes into play more in book number 1 than it does in book number 2, but it's constantly on the back of Maggie's mind because she knows medical knowledge in 2001 that she wants to put into practice in 1861 and 1941. She has to be very careful. She has to know what was available at those times that she could use that maybe weren't quite medical knowledge, but yeah.
I thought that was really smart because that is a problem with time travel because you've got all that ripple effect and you have to either kind of have a rule like you had or just like completely ignore it like they do in Doctor Who, where they go back and forth all through time and there's never any consequences. There's never any.
Right.
But I think that was a smart way to deal with it. Yeah. So you had Seth in 2001, you had Zachariah in 1941, and then Gray in 1861. So how did you come up with these three guys?
It was a lot of fun,
Yeah.
actually. So I wanted them to be distinctly different. I did not want any similar. Well, I mean, they have little similarities, but I wanted them to be completely different so that Maggie has a very big decision to make. And, because I'm a super plotter, I knew from the beginning what she would choose, but I did not anticipate one of the men becoming a little bit more of a stinker, and he got kind of, I really liked him. I won't say who. And so he kind of amped up the romance a little bit more than I was intending. And so I was kind of like trying to get him back in line, like, no, she's not choosing you. Stay where you're at. To the point that actually when my editor read it, she's like, okay, so if she's not choosing him, you need to either tone him down or amp up the romance with the other guy. So, and if you've read it, you probably know what I'm talking about. But I also wanted to make it so that the reader is genuinely uncertain who she's going to choose. So she had to fall in love with each of them, which is difficult. Kind of reminded me a little bit of The Bachelor, the TV show The Bachelor. You're always like, how does this one person fall in love with all these same people, people at the same time? So, but I think that as you read it, one of the gentlemen makes it known pretty fast that he's not the one, and then kind of leaves the other two out there. And so, but I also wanted, I wanted them to all be heroes. I didn't want one of them to be a super scumbag, although one of them kind of has a moment at the end. But I also wanted one of them to be just right for her, one of them who completely understands her, was sacrificial for her and offered her the same kind of love that she offers to everybody else throughout the book. And so that was the one she ends up with.
Yeah, no, I could have seen her with the three. I agree. You made them unique, different, and even in like the kisses and the other things like that, like they were different. Yeah, one of them made her wait. So
yeah, yeah, I know. My editor did say something about that too. She's like, "Oh, I just want him to kiss her," and I'm like, "Wait for it."
Do you think it's hard to build a romantic tension and keep it a clean romance?
No, I don't actually, because I think that there is so much to be said about longing in a romance, and that's a good question. Nobody's ever asked me that before. Part of it is, I set out knowing that it's going to be clean. But I think that tension as it builds without the physical part of it is what really draws me in as a reader. Because you're waiting for that moment, for that kiss or for that hand touch or whatever it is. And when you finally reach that moment, there's like this payoff then for the reader. And it doesn't even have to be extremely, what's the word I'm looking for?
Like erotic.
Graphic. Yeah. It doesn't have to be graphic. Yeah. So, and I think that that's where that real love comes from, is that deep place that isn't just physical, but emotional as well.
So you knew from the beginning which path she would pick. That wasn't a kind of a hard thing to decide.
No, partially. Well, not partially, but almost completely, because I knew what era I need book 3 to be in.
Oh, okay.
So, so the time crossing rule that they have is if they have the mark on their chest, so they have a mark that indicates whether they're a time crosser. And if it's on their chest, it means that they go from that point where they're born to their time crossing parent to the future, and they get 25 years. No, I'm sorry, they get 21 years. If it's on their back, if the mark is on the back of their head, they go back in time and they get 25 years. Maggie doesn't quite know that till the very end, but it doesn't really come into play for her. She just thinks she has 21 years in both. But it does come into play a little bit in book 3. And so I won't tell you the path that they take, because at the end of book 2, Maggie gives birth to identical twin girls, and they have the mark on the back of their head, which means that from that path they'll go back in time. So I can't tell you their future time, but their past time is actually 1692 in Salem, Massachusetts, during the witch trials. Yeah.
That'll be
That
good.
was an
That'll be really good.
Yeah, that was really intense to research and to write.
Yeah.
And so they go back and forth together. These identical sisters, they're awake together in 1692, and then in their other path that they're with.
When do they start time? Like, what age does the time traveling start?
Right away.
Right away.
So, yep. So from birth. So I just try to imagine what it would be like to be that person who, as you're coming to kind of your own awareness of what's going on around you, you'd be really confused. And so like even with Maggie, and in this moment, she talks to her papa in 1861, and she eventually tells him what's going on. And he's like, that kind of makes sense, because when you were little, you said some weird things. But, I have little kids, and I
Uh-huh.
remember my oldest was constantly saying the weirdest things to me, and I'm like, "What are you talking about?" So it's kind of funny to
Yeah.
think about, you know, as a kid, they might be saying weird things and you're just kind of brushing it off like, "I don't know
Mhm.
what you're talking about."
Yeah, yeah. I don't know if you've gotten a chance to watch on Hallmark this year. They have a show called The Way Home, and I think you would
Uh,
really like it. It has definitely some similar themes, and I think listeners, if you've enjoyed The Way Home, I think you'd enjoy this book because it's about the three generations of women that in this family that they have they have a time travel pond that takes them back, and there's been this like trauma in the family history, and so they can kind of try to fix the trauma, but things get complicated as you might expect. I think you'd really like
yeah,
it.
I haven't seen it yet, but my parents
Yeah.
have brought it up to me twice. They love Hallmark, and so they twice now they're like, "You have to watch this
Yeah.
show." So
Yeah.
yeah.
It's on, I think it's on Peacock now. So if you missed it, you can watch it on
Yeah.
there.
Today's episode of the podcast is sponsored by W Rated, the podcast where we willingly watch the world's worst rated movies. Join me, Daisy,
and me, Claire, as we break down the IMDb Bottom 100, choosing a different film from the list every episode.
We take a deep dive into the plot, production, release, and reviews, usually with a special guest, to uncover if these films are truly as bad as everyone says they are.
You can find us on Spotify, Apple, Good Pods, and anywhere else you find your podcasts.
It can make your brain hurt dealing with time travel, but I think that like, so I think that's why it's good that you had the rule about not
Mhm.
changing history, because especially like if you were in 2001, like you'd want to go and tell everybody, or
Yeah.
warn everybody.
Yeah. Yeah.
Hmm.
I agree.
Yeah. Do you think that Maggie is different in each era?
You know, one of the things that I try to do with historical fiction is I try to make the heroine be as real to their time period as possible while still appealing to a modern reader. So I try to know as much as I can about what's going on at that time and read other diaries and things like that to understand kind of what's going on in the minds of the people who I'm writing about, because I want them to be authentic to that time period. But again, I also don't want to alienate a modern reader who might have different ideas or opinions about things. And so writing a character who lives in three different time periods, and has one conscious mind but three bodies, she is going to be an accumulation of all of those experiences, all of those beliefs, all of those cultures, while still trying to maintain authenticity in each one. So it's super hard. And I wanted her to kind of be timeless. And that's part of the reason why the series is called Timeless, is because her soul is timeless. Her personality, or not her personality, but her mind, just the essence of who she is timeless. But she can't not be affected by each of those things. Like, in 2001, she's a woman who has the liberty to become a doctor, but in 1861, she has to be escorted or chaperoned wherever she goes, and so she fights that, but she also doesn't want to dishonor the ideals of the 1861 era, so she honors that. So I feel like, yes, she is the same person in each one, but different sides of her maybe come out a little bit more as she's dealing
Hmm.
with the issues in her life. And
Well,
perhaps
and
that's similar for us too, right? So
yeah.
I'm going to treat my children different than I would treat my neighbor, than I would treat my boss.
Mhm.
I am the same person, but I deal with situations differently.
Well, yeah, and also we are different depending on who we're around. Like it shouldn't be dramatically different, but like I
Mhm.
definitely have friends that I'm like a little bit sillier with or a little bit more
Mhm.
serious, or it just depends. So especially if you think about people in different times,
Mhm.
that would be even more
Yeah.
so.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a challenge. definitely. And so then in book 3, I have these identical twin sisters, and they have such vastly different personalities. And one of them, Hope, she has no time for the Puritans in 1692. And in the other time she lives in, she is a woman on the brink of everything. Like, she is going to do everything she can that's allowable, whatever. And so then you have Grace, who's always like reeling Hope in, like, keep your mouth shut, stop saying things like that, you're going to get accused of witchcraft, so that was challenging too, to try to. And it was kind of fun because I have daughters who are 16 and 18, and I use their personalities for those two, because that's exactly. And my oldest read it, and she's like, I know what you did there. I was like, yeah, yep, I did. So
Yeah. So if you had to pick to write a whole book on 1861, 1941, or 2001, which one would you pick?
I would pick 1861.
Okay.
Definitely. Yeah. I don't even know that going forward, I would choose those eras again. Like, World War II is just a little bit more modern than what I tend to like to write and read. So yeah, I enjoyed writing those periods, but to write a whole book set then would, yeah, I don't know.
Now, in the twins, did they have the same, because they're identical, they have the same years that they go
do.
back to? Okay.
Yep. They go back and forth.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, I really enjoyed the book. I thought it was very engrossing, and I didn't know kind of which one she was going to pick. I felt like there was arguments to all three, and so I really enjoyed it. I'm not normally like a sci-fi kind of person, but I just thought the characters were compelling enough, and there was enough tension and everything. So I think you did a really good job.
Thank you. Yeah, I never thought I would be a sci-fi writer. I just look at it as like historical romance times 3.
Yeah, it's like dual time, but triple time.
Yep.
Yeah. So you do have themes of faith running through the book. It's pretty mild. Is that something that's hard to kind of figure out how do I want to bring this into the story?
Yeah, for some stories, it's definitely a lot more organic. Like for book 1, that's one of the things that people have really identified, is there was a very strong faith element in that one. And so I was kind of a little nervous that book 2 wouldn't have as strong of a faith element, just because Maggie, that's really not her struggle. Her struggle isn't her faith. It's really, what era am I going to choose? Whereas in book 1, her struggle was, how do I trust God when things are not going how I want it to go? And so, I don't necessarily set out with a theme, a faith theme. It kind of grows naturally throughout. And then sometimes I do have to go back and add a little bit more in, or take a little bit out, depending on, the balance that I need for a story. It's definitely part of who I am and what I write, but I never want it to be something that makes people uncomfortable, first off. But I also want it to be something that comes from my own heart, so that it's authentic to who I am as a writer.
Well, yeah, because especially in this kind of story, like, you don't want a character that has a faith-based experience and then she ends up not choosing them. Like, that would be bad.
Yeah.
So it has to be kind of subtle.
We'd like to take a second and thank our sponsor for this episode of the podcast. It's the Hallmarkies merch store.
Are you looking for that perfect gift for the postable, Hardy, or Hallmarky in your life?
What about getting that t-shirt or hoodie that will help you stand out at your next holiday party?
Now is the time to check out the Hallmarkies merch store.
Full of festive designs by artists like Jessica Miller, Carrie from Hallmark Comics, and more.
You can even have more than just shirts, but totes, cell phone cases, notebooks, mugs, and more.
And it isn't just Hallmark. We have designs for Anna Green Gables, Man from Snowy River, The Nanny, and more.
Every purchase at the merch store goes to help support the podcast and allows us to make the great content you know and love.
There are frequent sales, so go to tpublic.com/stores/Hallmarkies or see the link in the description.
That's tpublic.com/stores/Hallmarkies.
We have some fun questions that we like to ask, get to know you questions.
Okay.
So first question, what is the best ice cream flavor?
Java chunk. I love
Oh,
I'm not a coffee drinker, but I love Java chunk ice cream.
oh, what? I've never
My
even heard of
downfall.
that. What is
Oh,
that?
well, so Kemp's is a Minnesota brand, but they
Okay.
partnered with Caribou Coffee, which is also a Minnesota brand, and they
Okay.
have created the best ice cream in the world. And I'm sorry if you don't have it where you live. So it's just basically a coffee flavored chocolate ice cream.
Yeah. Have you all had a bad winter this winter
We've
in
had
Minnesota?
it wasn't horribly cold, but it's lasted a long time. We got the most snow in March,
Yeah.
and then we had like several 70-degree days, and now it's snowed for 2 days. So we're
Yeah,
just
we have
over it.
had the craziest winter here in Utah. I mean, more than I have ever, I don't know, in my memory at least, it's the most snow we've ever had. I think it's
Yeah.
been setting off records and stuff. One of the ski resorts I think could stay open as late as July, which is crazy.
Wow.
Yeah, I mean we've had a lot. I've gotten my workouts in shoveling snow.
Yeah.
So, all right. Well, what is your favorite color?
My favorite color is probably shades of purple. I like purple.
Same.
Mhm.
That's my favorite. What music are you into right now?
I don't listen to a lot of music,
Uh-huh.
weirdly. My husband is a worship leader at our church, so I love listening to whatever he's playing because he's
Mhm.
always strumming on his guitar or whatever. So
Aw.
we listen to a lot of worship music here.
Cool. Good. Okay. What is your go-to date night food?
Um, my husband and I started dating in high school, and there's this little burrito place that we go to that they when we call, because we'll call and order it before we go, and they always know it's us because we get the exact same thing. We've been going there for 25 years. So even when we're not there because it's in a different town, we'll make it at home. Like we have our own version. So burritos.
It's burrito. That's your go-to.
Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
burritos. Mhm.
They're like, oh, they're back.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Oh yeah. They know us. We were just there this week.
Cool. All right. What is your go-to date night activity if you're going out and doing something fun?
Usually to Home Depot. So I say that tongue in cheek because it's kind of true.
Yeah.
We usually like to go out to eat. My husband's not a big, we watch, movies at home, but he doesn't really care for them in the theater. So we don't do that too often.
Uh-huh.
But yeah, I don't know. We
Yeah.
do. So he has a landscaping and lawn care company, and so he's home all winter. And so we
Mhm.
spend a lot of time together at home. So we don't go out a lot, but
Yeah.
unless we're working on a project and it's like, hey, we got to go to Home Depot. Time to go out
Well,
to eat.
I did hear a while back about people doing like meeting each other, like singles going to Home Depot, and they would put like a ribbon or something on their cart so that people would know that, oh, they're single. I've never tried it myself.
It's funny. Well, there you go. It just sets you up for marriage because
Yeah.
that's what most people are doing when they're married too.
Yeah.
That's funny.
All right. Which do you like better, dogs or cats?
I'm a dog person.
Mhm.
We have a dog and a cat, and our cat drives us crazy, but she is part of the family, so you can't
Mhm.
kick out family members apparently. So
Well, so they say cats, you have to earn their love.
yes,
Dogs.
so our dog treats us like she loves us. She like worships us. Our cat's kind of like, oh, you guys are still here? I didn't know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Which do you like better, beaches or mountains?
I like beaches better. I love the ocean.
Yeah.
Love water. We live on the Mississippi River, and I just love water. I do not know what it
Mhm.
is. It's my favorite. It's very
Same.
inspiring to me.
Same. Me
Mhm.
too. I love open water swimming, and I love that feeling of being in water and just how quiet it is. And that's the
Very
best.
peaceful.
Like,
Yep.
why do I live in a landlocked state? I don't understand. What is your favorite holiday to celebrate?
Um, hmm. I love Christmas. Christmas is usually the one that I would say. My second one usually is like 4th of July because I love summer. Summer is my favorite time of the year. We live for summer around here. So those two are kind of tied. But I like Christmas because it's longer. There's more of it to celebrate. 4th of July kind of means, oh, summer's half over. That kind of is a bummer. But
I know I do love the summer as well. I just the brightness, just and being able to swim outdoors, things like that. So fun. I'm with you. I was always bummed out that I had January birthday because then my friends that had summer birthdays could have pool parties and stuff like that. I was like, no fair.
My birthday is actually next week, so it's the end of April, and it's always it's a toss up. Is it going to be nice this year? Is it going to be snowy? You never know.
Well, happy early birthday.
Thank you.
All right, last question. What is your favorite Hallmark or romantic movie?
Oh, so my favorite is the Christmas is called The Merry Mix-Up. That's the one where where she comes and she gets the wrong house with the wrong family and then falls in love with the family and then finds out that it's the wrong one. And I love that one. I will watch that one over and over again.
That's a classic. I really feel like with that one, if you don't enjoy it on some level at least, then it's probably not the genre for you. These movies, I think. It brings in the humor, which is really nice. And Alicia Witt is just so good at that. She is bringing in the humor into the scenes.
Yep. And I always love movies where they not only fall in love with the hero, but they fall in love with the whole family.
Yeah.
Those always get me because when you marry or when you're in a relationship, for good or bad, that family comes along with. And so it's always fun when there's that connection.
Well, and his family's so over the top.
Right.
It's so funny.
She's a micro vegan, or I don't even remember what it's called, the mom and the other one. Yeah, no, it's a good one.
It really taps into the like screwball comedy age with things like Christmas Connecticut and stuff like that. I mean, and it works. That's a good pick. I enjoy that one. So you answered all the questions. Congratulations, very good.
Thank you.
Well, why don't you tell people when they can get the book and where they can get all that fun stuff?
Sure. So in this moment releases May 2nd, 2023, and it's available pretty much wherever books are found. The publisher is Bethany House, and Bethany House has a bookstore called Baker Book House, and that is the best deal you can get for this book right now. Before it releases, it's 40% off cover price and free shipping. After it releases, I think it's like 30% off and free shipping. So it's a pretty good deal. But you can also find me and all my books at GabrielleMeyer.com. And I'm on Instagram and Facebook far too much. And I love connecting with readers. So you can find me there too.
We'll have all that information in the description. So you should also definitely check it out. And thanks again for coming and talking with us.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
I'd like to thank Gabrielle for coming on the podcast. This was so much fun to get to talk with her. And I really did enjoy the book. So I highly recommend it. And if you get a chance to read it, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments and what you thought of the book and each of the paths that you went on. I thought that was very intriguing. So I would love to hear your thoughts. And we have a playlist with all of our author interviews in the description. And you can find me at Rachel's Reviews, all of our social media, iTunes, YouTube, and on Rotten Tomatoes. So check that out. Also, make sure you're following the podcast, A Hallmarkies Pod and Hallmarkies Podcast. And if you are listening on iTunes, please leave your ratings and reviews. That really helps us. And if you are watching on YouTube, please give the video a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel. We appreciate that so much. We also have the Patreon group, which is so much fun, and the merch store. So please take a look. And thanks so much again to Gabrielle. And we'll talk to y'all later. Bye.